Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing tonight, Rosie?
Tonight I'm cozy, very hygge. I got my cup of turmeric ginger tea.
Ooh.
That's what I'm sporting right now.
Man, I'm a little envious. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it is.
It is, in fact, like we talked about last week, dark, or getting dark. We're recording at 3:59 p.m. And
I hate it.
outside the window, it is...
It's difficult. It's
twilight.
It's a hard transition. I always forget about it every single time that it happens.
Yeah, you're like, I'm really looking forward to winter this year. And then it happens, and you're like...
I guess it's just hard to... It's just hard to live your normal life when it gets dark out. I have a real sympathy for people that live in places where it's dark for a full couple of months or whatever it is. I don't even know.
Well, I mean, there's a connection between your vitamin D levels and... you know, your mood, and you're getting a lot less vitamin D when you have 5 hours less of sunlight a day. So
I guess what I'm getting at is that I need one of those special lamps.
Yes, that's a very good idea.
Yeah.
But anyway, you have an episode for us this week that's something, it's kind of a popular subject, but a lot of the facts people think they know about it are based on a movie that's not 100% accurate.
Right.
So,
well, I wanted to start off with saying that we recently recorded our episode about different trials and hardships that Indigenous people are facing. And then that tied up with this month being American Indigenous Peoples Month. I believe that's the title. Just helped push me in the direction to do my own deep dive episode about the true life of Pocahontas.
all right. Well, I'm looking forward to learning.
Thank you. I'm really excited. And also disclosure, there's so many different versions of this story. And I did my best and pieced together what I believe. There's so many different historians, you know, like do their own thing. So this is what I got. If you're upset about it, please don't message me.
All right.
All right.
Let's rock and roll.
So Pocahontas, always a big part of my life. I was born in the 90s, and most millennials will agree that Disney's Pocahontas is a very special film. I watched it all the time. It's still one of my favorites. In fact, my first crush, I wish I would have said Cocoam, but truly it was John Smith. And as I got older, I was also always fascinated with Native American culture.
Can I just say, I'm kind of bummed that I did my hair today.
Because you want to wear your hat.
Now I want to wear my Native American hat. I can't remember which tribe the kid was from who made this.
I thought it was Navajo.
I thought it was Apache. So maybe someone who's seen this, who knows more than I do about Native American culture, can identify this pattern.
That came from a fair trade shop in the Mall of America with all different stands of cultural shops. It was really cool.
Bought it directly from the kid who made it, so that was pretty cool. And which is why I can't find another one, and I'm trying not to wear it out. Anyway.
In school, we're taught about a little bit about Pocahontas and all the terrible things that European settlers did to an extent. But I don't really remember hearing primarily Pocahontas' story. It just seems pretty vague to me. And then as I got older, I heard a lot about the Disney story being wrong and being so frustrated with that. But today is going to be the truth. So,
all right. As far as we know, according to the sources you could find.
Right.
Of course, this was 400 years ago, so.
I pieced it together. I think I did a pretty good job. So.
Awesome. Wait, what year did it start? Or what year was she born?
1596.
Wow. Okay.
So in many Native American cultures, at least from a long time ago, children are given a name at birth, and that name changes as the child grows older, just because parents are able to identify better the individual's personality and give them a name that's more correct to them.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. So Pocahontas was born in 1596, and she started out with the name Amunute.
What was that?
Amunute.
How's that spelled?
Amunute.
Oh, cool. Very easy to spell. Amunuit?
I hope I'm saying, yeah.
Kind of like Inuit?
Right.
Wait, how's it spelled?
Amunute.
UT. I can't listen. Oh, for some reason I heard an I in there when you were talking, and I was really confused. I can't hear things and see things in my head at the same time, apparently.
It's okay. As she got older, her name would be Matoka, which means the flower between two streams. Her name was never actually, well, it would be later. Her name was not Pocahontas at first. That was a nickname given to her by her father. It translates to playful one, while others believe it means ill-behaved child. Pocahontas grew up in East Virginia and was part of the Powhatan tribe that had a population of roughly 25,000 people.
What?
This massive tribe was broken up into about 30 smaller tribes or villages that governed themselves with their own selected group of leaders.
Oh, okay. And how big were those villages?
Well, there are roughly 30, like divided into 30
people?
No, they were divided into 30. So they were pretty big.
So how many, did you say 25,000?
Yeah.
So almost 1,000 people in each tribe? Yeah. Okay. See, in the movie, it looked like there was like 20 people in the tribe.
I disagree with you.
I haven't seen it in a while.
By a while, you mean a couple months.
Yeah.
Anyway, Pocahontas was indeed Chief Powhatan's daughter, but this didn't mean that much. She didn't grow up much differently other than having more training and education and like some special treatment, but she had a lot of siblings, so she wasn't known as like royalty, and you know, she didn't wear a tiara or anything special like that.
Did she wear a tiara in the movie?
Well, no.
Oh, okay.
But they emphasized on her being a princess, like, you know, and it wasn't like that big of a deal.
Daughter of the chieftain.
Yeah. Pocahontas was well known for her playful spirit and her cartwheels as a child.
Cool.
Chief Powhatan was extremely smart and wise. He was known as being very intelligent and also a kind man, and everyone respected him as their leader. So he was like the president of the Powhatan tribe. Like, even though each smaller village had their own like government almost, or like governed leaders, Chief Powhatan was the main guy.
So he was like the federal.
He was like on
government.
Top. Right.
And the other tribes were like the states?
Kind of, yeah. So, as the chief of all these 30 tribes, Chief Powhatan was expected to have many children. Each year, one female from each tribe would be brought to Chief Powhatan to bear his children and become his bride.
What?
Yeah. So...
Well, did he make this
tradition? Probably not.
This sounds like a...
But it
pretty
makes
good
sense
deal for him
because he was so smart, and they just wanted to keep that going, you know.
Yeah.
So, the girls would be at least 14 years old, and they were the most beautiful and intelligent of each tribe. And then after being married to Chief,
times have changed. 14. That's crazy.
I know, but it was like kind of normal in this time period.
Yeah, I mean that's when you start developing those things. So
right.
Zook has a lot of input on this particular subject.
Yeah, he was very emotional during this part.
Yeah.
After being married to the chief, they'd be able to go back to their home village after their baby was weaned. So about a year. They went with him, they had sex with him, had his baby, weaned the baby, and then they could go away or go back to their old tribe and get married to whomever they wanted. So it was considered a huge honor to the woman and the tribe that she belonged to. Yeah.
So like it wasn't like, oh no, she's been...
No, it was like she just gave birth to the chief's kid. So that's really cool. And now we want to marry her.
Well, that's nice that they wouldn't like see her differently or shun her like some cultures would, you know? No,
it was a huge honor.
The red A.
And she would be a respected female in the tribe.
Cool.
So yeah, that was just like a little bit of information I wanted to share.
That's a lot different from what we know.
That just goes to show how many siblings Pocahontas had, like half siblings.
Oh, gotcha. You know? Yeah.
Chief Powhatan had a very special relationship with Pocahontas's mother, whom I don't know her true name, but he had nicknamed her mother Pocahontas. Little is known about them as a couple, except that it's thought that Pocahontas's mother died giving birth to her. Powhatan must have felt like his daughter acted and looked a lot like her mother, reminded him of her mother, and lovingly gave her the nickname that he had given her mother. When Pocahontas was older, around 14, when she was coming age,
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Pocahontas' mother wasn't like the chieftain's wife. She was just, one of the concubines. Did he have a wife, or was that just not a thing for the chieftain?
He had a lot of wives for like a year, and then...
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Like back in the day, kings used to have like hundreds of thousands of wives.
But I think he grew closer to some more than others,
Yeah.
Like Pocahontas' mom.
Like you would.
So when Pocahontas was older, around age 14, she had her coming of age ceremony, and this is when she permanently changed her own name from Moatoka to Pocahontas.
Cool.
So she...
In honor of her father?
Well, in honor of her mother, really.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In 1607, Jamestown was founded in Virginia by 3 British ships.
So she was 12? Or what year was she born again?
1596. So yeah, she was...
Oh, 11 or 12?
Yeah.
What?
We're thinking around 11. 104 settlers were commissioned by King James to establish the first English colony, find gold, and a water passage to the Pacific Ocean. At this time, well, in my notes, I have that she's about 10 years old, but that's a pretty close difference. Mm-hmm. As the settlers were getting settled into their new world, they would get mixed messages from the Native Americans. Some of them would welcome the settlers and be willing to trade with them, while others were just very, very angry at their arrival.
Yeah, as you would be. I mean, I can see both sides, like, depending on how you look at it, but I would be pretty anxious if there was this land that was just, undeveloped, and then all of a sudden these people you've never heard of before start setting up a town.
Right. I am going to be referring to Native Americans as Indians sometimes, just because that was the term everybody used back then, and it wasn't derogatory at all. Just want to let you guys know. After 2 months of the settlers being there, some 200 Indians attacked the settlers. 2 people were killed and 11 were injured. And the attack was a shock to the settlers. They had not expected life to be difficult in this new world. They didn't know that the Native American people wouldn't like them for some shocking reason.
Well, like, look at it this way. If another country invaded, England or France, or who was settling here? It was England?
British, yeah.
Like, if another country just waltzed in there and set up a town in your country, you wouldn't be happy.
Right.
So why would you be so shocked that the natives responded this way?
Mm-hmm. Well, partially it was because of this confusing relationship that they had, where some people were kind to them and other people were upset.
Oh, yeah.
But the colonists were not doing well. They were finding it almost impossible to find food or clean water, which is strange because there was such a huge opportunity to hunt and find food, or to boil water and make it clean, but they didn't know how to fish or farm, and it seemed like they were not very prepared for this trip anyways, so soon they were struck with disease and got very sick from mosquitoes.
Oh.
After seeing the settlers and the way that they were living, the Powhatan people started to believe that the settlers were trying to escape from starvation from where they came from. As they seemed so aloof to what was going on, they didn't know how to survive or take care of themselves. So the native people were just confused at why they were just failing at life so badly. Let's talk a little bit about John Smith at this time.
Oh, yeah.
John Smith was kind of like the leader of Jamestown. He was short, he was brash, he had brown hair and eyes. He was very cocky and very self-confident.
Doesn't sound anything
like the cartoon version.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, he was he was confident, but not like cocky.
He wasn't. Well, he was kind of. I thought more.
Yeah, I suppose that's right.
He in the movie he's like long golden locks and blue eyes, very handsome and tall.
Yeah.
He always felt like he knew what was best.
Well, in the movie, he's not really.
In the movie, John is like he's just putting in the hours, trying to be helpful. But in real life, he was more like the leader. He was always putting his own opinion above others. But while they were on their journey to the new land, while they were still on the seas, John Smith was jailed for getting into some type of fight with others on the ship.
In the brig?
Yeah, he was in the brig. Well, shortly after the settlers landed, they realized how much they actually needed John Smith, so they let him out and he became the explorer and soldier of Jamestown. John Smith was very helpful to the colony and they depended on him to find food. His plan was to trade for corn. John had to travel through new unexplored territories and he eventually found himself head-to-head with the Powhatan people. He had a pistol with him and he threatened the group of men that had him surrounded. Well, he was terribly outnumbered and overpowered, and the Powhatan people took him as prisoner. While he was a prisoner, John Smith was brought from village to village to be shown off. And this would go on for a few weeks until he was brought back to Pocahontas' tribe. And he was brought to Chief Powhatan's longhouse to meet the great chief himself.
Oh, cool. He had a longhouse.
Mm-hmm. So John Smith was the first colonist to meet Pocahontas and get involved with any Native American chief. Okay, so here's what's been told for centuries of what happens next. 2 large stones are brought out. Some guards take John Smith. They lay him on the ground with his head on the stones. Then one warrior has a club and is about to strike and beat his brains out. As the warrior holds up his club, ready to strike, Pocahontas runs out, puts her arms up, shielding John's body. She tells the crowd that if they must kill John Smith, that she will die as well. And John Smith's life is saved by an Indian princess, and because she shielded Smith, in the end, she saves the whole colony, and with it, democracy.
So this is the popularized version?
Right. This is the version you'll see in old school textbooks and somewhat in the movie.
All right.
This story has been so legendary that you can actually see illustrations of it in the U.S. Capitol building. The rotunda of the U.S. Capitol is where the story of Pocahontas is. It's said that this story is part of the United States DNA and crucial to American history. But did this really happen?
I don't know.
A few months after captivity, John Smith was released. Immediately, he wrote back letters to England to explain the experience. He never wrote about this story involving Pocahontas in the initial letters. Instead, he wrote that the native people were kind to him and wanted to negotiate with him to create a functioning trade relationship.
Do you hear what's happening outside the door?
Yes.
Zook is like protesting or something.
It's protesting.
All right. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. In fact, Chief Powhatan was giving John a great honor and respect. He was creating a role for him in his chiefdom. John Smith may have felt like he was going to be executed at some point early on, but what was really happening was more likely an adoption ceremony.
Oh.
Or a ceremony where Indian priests were seeing if he was worthy of a greater purpose.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And this was all in John Smith's letters?
From what John Smith wrote, historians were able to piece together that type of ceremony being, or what that ceremony was. But he never talked about Pocahontas having any involvement in what happened.
Interesting. And his letters are actually like documentation of that time.
And I should say, he never talked about Pocahontas in these letters at first. And I'll clarify what that means later.
At first, okay.
Yeah. John Smith was to look at Chief Powhatan as a son would look at his father, with deep respect and obedience. So how cool and smart of Chief Powhatan to ceremoniously adopt him, This would give them the power to have respect for each other, try to be a mutual ally, and work in having a trade relationship.
Yeah, no kidding.
So there's no real evidence of Pocahontas being at the ceremony, like I just said. Everything that we know is what John Smith writes in these letters. But historians don't think Pocahontas would have been there because she would have been way too young to attend such ceremonies.
Yeah, so what year was this? Like, was it years after Jamestown was settled, or was it around the same time?
It was pretty close after, like maybe a couple of months, because they were doing so poorly.
Okay.
John Smith was supposed to go find food, right? So that was his job when he was first captured.
Huh. Wonder if an 11-year-old would take that much interest in a beheading ceremony.
No, she wouldn't have been allowed to be there, is what historians are saying.
Huh.
Even if it wasn't a beheading ceremony, right? It was a special type of adoption ceremony.
Oh, yeah.
You know. So in 1608 and 1612, John Smith published his exploration adventures and his experiences with the Indians. It wasn't until 1624, in his new book, General History of Virginia, that he wrote about Pocahontas being the one to save him, or the two having any romantic feelings toward each other.
So was this after she was captured and taken to England?
By 1624?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe he was making some kind of... Never mind. I won't jump ahead because...
Yeah, that is jumping
because
ahead.
that's not what happened, right? In the movie. In the movie, she chooses to go to England.
Right.
And I'm not sure what the true story is yet.
Okay.
So.
But isn't that interesting that around the time he had these other books published, he didn't say anything about Pocahontas. And then all of a sudden, in 1624, he does. But nobody was alive to contradict his story at that time when he published that new book. And John left out the part where Pocahontas was about 11 years old while he was 27 years old.
Yeah.
So he's romanticizing a lot of things. Another interesting thing is that this isn't the first time John was saved by a princess. It turns out that he wrote identical stories about beautiful royal princesses saving his life in different lands multiple times.
No way.
Isn't that just a wild coincidence?
Wow. I mean, I guess it's like he had respect for women enough to like put them on a pedestal like that, but at the same time, it's like he was pumping up his own desirability.
His own ego?
Yeah, like they thought I was so cool that they saved my life.
Well, John loved to romanticize his travels, and he found that his readers also preferred it that way too. So
guess he should have lived in Italy then, huh?
It was a better way to make the big bucks. It was a little more steamy.
All right.
A century and a half later, when America was about to be independent from Britain, the founding fathers wanted to be different from their European roots. They wanted to be known as more heroic, so they used the story as a way to look better to the rest of the world. Instead of being known to fight and murder the native people, they have this beautiful love story to work with. Through American schools, published in classroom textbooks after generation after generation learned of the story of Pocahontas, a Native American Indian princess, saving John Smith, a European settler's life, and the romance that grew from it.
Okay, so what really happened, Rosie?
Well, even though John Smith exaggerated most of the story, the two did see each other and were in communication a little bit. John Smith...
Seems a little different than falling in love.
Right. John Smith ended up teaching Pocahontas English, and she taught him her language. So they worked together, well, briefly, as translators in helping each other out.
Okay.
Pocahontas was soon a valued translator within months and was used to help the colony and tribe speak together. She also helped deliver food to the colony with others from her tribe. And John Smith recorded a couple different phrases that Pocahontas had taught him and vice versa. So that was about it for what how they saw each other.
Okay.
John Smith returned to England for a time. He was not liked by his men or by the Powhatan tribes. He gained a reputation. He was too cocky. People just were done with him.
Huh.
He was there to be their leader and to trade, but he was not allowed to give the Indians what they wanted. And because of this, the colony wasn't getting food and supplies. On and on. For political reasons, he decided to leave. But Pocahontas was told that he had died. So that was just like the end for her of John Smith.
Again, very different
Than the story from the movie.
Yeah.
In 1609, the colony was doing terrible. New ships came with about 500 settlers, but because of storms, most of the supplies and food that they brought with them went overboard. That winter, the settlers were forced to eat rats, dirty snow, and even the bodies of those who died.
Oh. My gosh. So it's like an Oregon Trail situation.
Yeah.
Before they even went out west.
Things were not going well at all.
Yikes.
When Pocahontas was around 14 or 15, she married Kocoum.
Kocoum. So she did marry him,
She did. A historian said his name different, but with the spelling that I'm familiar with, so I'm just going to go with Kocoum because that's how I know him.
That's how she says it in the movie.
Yeah, and that's obviously the right way.
Should I marry?
Kocoum was a brother of one of the village leaders named Japasaw. She left her home village to live with Kocoum, and his village was much closer to Jamestown. News of her move indeed spread like gossip through Jamestown. As summer came, the Indian people would shed their clothes to help combat the heat. And this wasn't weird or sexual to them, but to the people of Jamestown, however, it was a huge disgrace. Many of the colonists were men who hadn't been with a woman in a super long time and were so ravenous that they kidnapped many of the Indian women and children and started raping them.
Oh my God. This is an interesting side conversation that I'm not qualified to have, but like the role that like I don't know, being overly snooty plays in people's like ravenous desires, because like you said before, like them having to be nude was not sexualized.
It was just like a way to combat heat.
Common in a lot of places where it's hot, Africa, and I didn't even know that was normal in Native American tribes either. But
well, at this time at least.
Like, I mean, if you're in Texas in the middle of summer, although that was Mexico at that point, so but anyway, it's a complicated conversation that I'm not qualified to have, but it's interesting to think about.
Well, what else is interesting is the way that these settlers viewed Native Americans, just being illiterate, not intelligent at all. Like
I'm sure that contributed to the way they saw this.
So apparently they didn't see much wrong with this.
But English settlers were going and raping Native American women, and they're saying that they're the ones that are a disgrace?
That's what yeah, exactly.
What kind of irony is that? You should have self-control and be able to handle yourself.
Well, especially when
you can't blame it on other people that you're going to take advantage of someone.
Especially when their goal is to save them and turn them into
what they are.
Christian people.
Wow.
Well, news to them, rape was taken very seriously in the Powhatan culture.
Good.
If a man sexually assaulted a woman, they were immediately sentenced to death.
What? Wow.
And because of this, the crime of rape was extremely rare.
That's interesting. Because, that's a crime that's actually really hurting someone, and they took it seriously.
Right.
And yet, the British called them savages.
Right. So, like you're saying, on this same path that you're going down, the colonists were not used to such harsh sentencing. And back in England, men raped women all the time, and they did this with very little consequence. Usually because of the way, the woman was looked at afterwards. She was no longer pure for marriage, and it was a bad look on their family name, blah, blah, blah.
Whereas in Native America,
Native
they all hooked up
American
with
culture.
the chief.
That was an honor.
I know, but that was a joke. Anyway, what I'm saying is, like, they held women in higher regard in Native American tribes than they did in
They were way more of
English
equals. Yeah.
culture.
Right.
They weren't a second-class citizen.
When the Powhatan tribe learned of what these colonist men were doing, they started a war. And this would be the first Anglo-Powhatan War. At this time, Pocahontas was about 16 years old. She was married and said to be very pregnant. The colonists came
How
up...
old was she?
16.
Wow.
The colonists came up with a plan to kidnap Pocahontas to keep Chief Powhatan from continuing the war. They decided they needed leverage, otherwise the colony was going to be destroyed. In letters back to England, the colony claimed that there was no rape, but rather the native people had stolen weapons from them and refused to return them. And that was the reason stealing Pocahontas seemed acceptable, to keep the peace until these weapons were returned. Once Pocahontas gave birth to her child, she was kept with the other women of her tribe, being taken care of and pampered. It was tradition to stay away from her husband for a short time to heal and spend time with the other women around her. In the middle of the night, while Pocahontas was sleeping, she was kidnapped by the colonists. She had no way to defend herself because of how weak she was after giving birth.
Oh my gosh.
She screamed as she was brought on board an English ship and hauled off to a jail cell, all in the name of peace.
And this was when she was 16? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh my gosh. In the name of peace, too.
Right.
What a joke.
And this next bit is according to Powhatan's oral history.
You know what's scary? This is just a side tangent.
Yeah.
But, like, all the world powers right now, every country who successfully took a piece of land and held on to it were, like, the cruelest people in history, you know, because they were willing to go that far where they would just steal everyone's land and put their name on it. Mm. And now that's what the world is made of.
It is.
It's very weird.
It is very weird. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yeah. This next bit is according to Powhatan's oral history, and it, like, shatters my soul. You ready for it?
I think so.
Apparently, Kocoum found out about his wife's kidnapping the next day, and obviously he was beyond angry. He set off to Jamestown to rescue his wife, shooting any white man that he saw along the way with arrows. As he made his way towards the ship, Kocoum was shot dead. So I hate that part because, well, first of all, Kocoum didn't get the best rep in the Disney movie.
He went a little extreme, killing everyone he saw, but I can understand why he was
done in the name of love.
That's not going to hold up in court.
I'm
just saying, like, it's a tough situation. There's a lot of emotion involved.
There's a lot of tension.
But, like,
there's a lot
obviously,
of war.
if you go in shooting everyone you see,
I know, but
you're going to get taken down instead of, like, trying to figure out who actually took her.
I guess I'm really romanticizing this, and you're making a lot more literal and rational.
Well, you're making the same mistake John Smith made then.
Okay. Okay.
But, yeah, I understand, like, he would have been very heartbroken and frustrated.
Yeah.
And it's really sad that he got shot. I'm not saying that his, like, I don't know, he did kill people, so. But anyway.
Well, let's go back to the story.
What do I know?
Pocahontas was helpless, scared, and depressed. She stopped eating, and the colonists were scared that she would die. Eventually, they allowed her sister to visit her and encourage her to keep her strength.
Now, is she still in Jamestown at this point?
Yeah, she's on the ship in the brig.
Oh, so she's traveling to England?
Well, she's just on the ship in the brig because that's like the jail.
Sitting at the dock?
Yeah.
Oh.
Pocahontas told her sister that men were sexually abusing her on a daily basis at this time. The colonists promised to give Pocahontas back if the Indians gave back the weapons that they, quote-unquote, stole and if they signed a peace treaty and gave them supplies. But the chief wasn't going to give in so easily. Pocahontas' father refused to stop his war until he was given his daughter back. Negotiations went on for more than a year, and during this time, the colony tries to remake Pocahontas. So,
like the re-education camps that
Right.
they used to have with Native American people.
right, so she wasn't in the jail cell this whole time. She was taken out and, they were trying to make her a Christian, trying to put her in civilized clothing, teach her manners. I don't know.
Trying to tell her it's okay to rape women.
Right. So now comes a little bit of a fuzzy chunk. There are a few conflicting stories of what happens when it comes to John Ralph. Okay, do you remember John Ralph from Pocahontas 2? Journey to the New World.
I was like, what happened to John Smith? Who's this guy?
Okay, well, in
And I was like,
Pocahontas
why is
2
everyone named John?
Right? I was also like, why are we reusing John again? But like in
But
Pocahontas
this was
2,
a real person?
she falls in love with him, and like she's kind of conflicted because she still kind of loves John Smith, but she thought he was dead, and then he just popped out of nowhere.
In the movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So to those of us that this name does sound familiar, I'm going to try to put it in a clearer light for you.
Yeah, I like your flannel, by the way.
My shacket?
Yes, your shacket.
Thank you.
Whatever that means. It's that time of year. Plaid.
Also
print.
known as my Walmart special.
Yeah. All right. Sorry to interrupt. Whew. Just learning a lot of new info tonight on a topic I thought I knew.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one story is that while in captivity, Pocahontas becomes pregnant. And this was obviously evidence to those in the colony that she was being raped, and they needed to cover up the crime. Otherwise, they knew that there would never be peace between them and the Powhatan tribe. So John Ralph would be the key in this cover. John Ralph was a wealthy man in the tobacco business, and he was farming it in Jamestown and selling it in England for huge profit. He was a widower in his 40s and well known around the colony. In fact, he may have been one of the men to rape Pocahontas. We don't really know. He was chosen to marry Pocahontas and cover up the pregnancy, even though it was rape.
Because they really didn't know who the father was because it was happening to her so often.
Right. So they just needed to pick somebody and join the two. Marrying an Indian was illegal because they were considered less than human. So in order to make this big no-no seem a little better, Pocahontas was forced to go through a Christian baptism in roughly 1614. During this ceremony, she was deemed to have a human soul and given the Christian name Rebecca.
What a condescending
I know.
garbage culture.
It's super
Can
icky.
you imagine?
No, it's super, super gross.
It's like that show. What's that show where that lady went back in time?
Outlander?
Yeah, and she got captured for a minute by the English people, and they're so icky. I mean, I know that's a show's representation of them, but
Yeah.
I mean, hearing stories like this doesn't really make it seem like it's any different.
I know, the part where now she has a human soul. Like, what?
Yeah.
Well, after she was baptized, Pocahontas was married to John Ralph. The other version of this story is that Pocahontas willingly decided to become a Christian, and she learned to read and do things the English way and liked it that way. While in captivity, she was allowed to be in the colony, learning the proper way women were supposed to act and dress. While spending her days within the colony walls, Pocahontas and John Ralph met, introduced, and eventually fell in love and got married. So I'll let you decide which version seems true. One seems way more true to me than the other.
This whole idea that like the way we do things is the one true way we're supposed to do things. It's so annoying to me. Mm-hmm. Like that any group of people can think they have everything figured out.
Well, it's like they don't want you to save their souls. They're perfectly happy. Like,
well, yeah,
they have their own
that's
stuff.
That's just it. Everyone has something different that works for them, and to have anytime you think you have everything figured out, you're just on a crash course to fail, because as soon as you stop trying to improve and trying to learn, and if you're fighting to just be right instead of to learn what's right, then you've lost your way. And so when you think like you need to turn these people into just like you, that's one of my pet peeves. It drives me nuts.
I know. And the native people didn't care at all what the settlers believed, religiously,
They were trying to help out.
I don't care.
I mean, some of the tribes were trying to help out and be peaceful, even though these people just randomly showed up in their land. But yeah,
it's very frustrating.
It's strange. All right. Well, is that it?
No, that's not it.
Oh.
Either way.
You made it sound like that was it.
Well, that was my two options, pick your own adventure story for those two options. Either way, Chief Powhatan heard news that Pocahontas was married, that she was safe, and that she was seemingly happy. So he signed the peace treaty. It was called the Peace of Pocahontas. The Powhatan and colonist people would only go a few years without fighting with this peace treaty in place, and Pocahontas was never allowed to see her family again. And now I really wonder what's going on in Pocahontas's mind. If she felt so broken at this time, was she just trying to survive? Was she suffering from some type of Stockholm syndrome and living as a Christian, civilized woman? We don't know. And it's interesting because the two documentaries were so different on that aspect. And I just can't help but feel like she was suffering. She wasn't just embracing this new life of...
Well, yeah. I mean, have you talked about how long she lived yet?
No.
Okay. Well, I think that might be indicative of how she was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to interject real quick again, too. Another thing to think about is the fact that the tribes and the settlement spoke two different languages.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't really communicate with each other. So all of these transactions were probably very difficult to have, because you have two groups of people speak completely different languages, don't know each other's languages, and they're trying to communicate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, communication's the most important thing. I mean, I'm sure that's also the cause of a lot of problems we have today.
I was going to say, because governments are so good at that now.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is the language barrier is a huge part of why, humans can't effectively communicate between cultures.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Moving on. Once the two were married, Pocahontas and John Ralph went to England to live. So now she's ripped from her homeland. Everyone in England believed the couple to be happily in love. In fact, a romantic fairy tale that was living in their midst.
That's sad.
They were like modern day celebrities. People were obsessed about them, even to the point of making souvenirs to sell, like little portraits, books, paintings, etc. Pocahontas gave birth to a healthy baby boy, and they named him Thomas Ralph. And John Ralph wrote that he was the father on the birth certificate. So whatever happened before they were married, he was the dad and the father now. It's really interesting watching the documentaries about her being in England. She just was paraded like a circus animal. Just
a trophy wife.
Just used as a token of, look how great we did converting this woman, and look how the natives look. Like, it was just sick. Pocahontas was known as Rebecca Ralph in England. She wore English clothing and was fluent in English.
Rebecca Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
2 first names.
She was famous countrywide and invited to all the modern parties and special events. Everyone wanted to be seen with the Indian princess. She even met King James and Queen Anne, and supposedly made them change their opinions on the native people for the better. Pocahontas played the role that she was given. Historians believe that because she was representing her Powhatan tribe and roots, she wanted to portray herself as civil as she could, displaying a good name for her people. She worked hard trying to make things better for her people, while other historians think she stabbed her people in the back and didn't want anything to do with them anymore.
So this is all like conjecture, speculation, because there is no like written record. It's all word of mouth.
Well, just depending on the choices that she made, because she was the face of the Indian people from back home. Some people think because she was so civilized and refused to. I don't know.
She was kidnapped at 16.
Right.
Like, what choice did she have but to conform to what her captors forced her to do?
Mm-hmm. And others say that her, like, well-behaved nature and everything, that was just the best way she could make a good name for her people.
Like, at this point, she was a kidnap victim. Mm-hmm. She was, being held against her will, and she can't be held responsible for any of the decisions she made while under captivity. Like, if historians think she turned her back on her people, they should think about what they would do in that situation. If they were captured at 16 and raped over and over again and forced to become a completely different person.
Mm-hmm. Now, later in life, Pocahontas would meet Captain John Smith again, and she did not have a high opinion of him at this time, especially after learning about the lies he was selling in different articles of literature.
This is John Ralph?
John Smith.
John Smith. Oh.
That she bumped into.
Oh.
She had the courage to actually tear him apart and confront him for how much lies that he had been spreading about her and her people, telling him that, quote, "Your countrymen will lie much." She didn't make it private, and a lot of people commented on how loudly she was yelling at him. So it was like the one time she lost her cool. Oof. In 1617...
Well, I'm sure there was a lot of pent-up,
yeah,
frustration.
In 1617, Pocahontas, John Ralph, and the 2-year-old baby Thomas decided to make the journey back to Virginia. She was ecstatic to go home and be with her family again. They packed up all their belongings and headed aboard. While on the ship, Pocahontas grew gravely ill. She suffered from a mysterious illness that killed her before she was ever able to set foot on her land again.
What? Was this... So this is the story.
Mm-hmm.
She died on this trip on the ship of a mysterious illness. But there were no autopsies back then. So they could have just brought her out to sea and threw her overboard. Like,
they could have done a lot. And what's really interesting is while they're still on this journey to Virginia, the boat turned around and went right back to England.
After she died?
Yeah.
So it's almost like this was a plan.
It is. And that's a conspiracy theory. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Now, Thomas,
I didn't know this.
Thomas, the little baby, was also sick, allegedly, but instead of being there for the child, John Ralph took him and left him with a man named Sir Lewis Stuckley. And John Ralph would never see his child again after that. So just dropped him off. It was done.
In England.
Mm-hmm.
So this kid has to grow up in this horribly racist culture, wondering why he looks different than the other kids.
Well, they did make an exception. So there was absolutely no white and black relationships to be tolerated, right? You couldn't marry somebody that was a different race than you. But they made this exception, and I can't remember what it was called. It was for descendants of Pocahontas and John Ralph, if you were in that bloodline. I can't.
Well,
that's a different
good,
day,
I guess.
But it was wrong.
Well, yeah, the whole thing's wrong and messed up.
As for Pocahontas, instead of having a lavish funeral that Ralph could have easily afforded for his wife, remember he was a very rich tobacco farmer.
Oh, yeah.
Making huge profits from Jamestown to selling in England. She was buried in an unmarked grave. And with John Ralph's wife and child gone, John went back to Virginia on his own to farm more tobacco and make way huge loads of money.
So she was buried. They did bring her body back to England.
In an unmarked grave. Yeah.
Or that's what they say.
Again, like, you don't really... She could have been poisoned easily.
That's so sad.
I know. Isn't that terrible?
Especially because she was really excited to see her family.
Right.
Like, she wanted to make that trip.
Yeah, she did. So, yeah, she died at the crisp age of 21, was it? I guess I didn't write down.
It said 20.
Okay.
Because it was in March of...
Oops.
And I guess...
Oops.
I mean, if it was in March, it's most likely that she was still 20.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know what month she was born?
Age 20. Oops. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I don't know.
Okay.
That.
Can you turn that away from you a little bit? It's making your face.
Thank you.
All right. That's better.
So that's my condensed down version. I did have to skip over a few things like her life in England and different things that she did, but overall...
Well, I think it was a good structure of like the cliff notes of the story.
Thank you. So, yeah, I was really, really excited to share this story. And because she is still my favorite Disney princess, and I know how historically incorrect the film is.
But it's a good movie.
But Just Around the River Bend will always touch my soul.
I know. Well, thank you for putting the effort into making this outline. I'm glad that, there's no like perfect source for this because it was so long ago and nothing is well documented.
Or accurately.
So,
yeah.
Like, take this whole story with a grain of salt, that in mind.
Right.
Knowing that.
Yeah. Like, don't come at me because there's so many different documentaries and historians' views,
Well, even the historians have to speculate on a lot of the details.
Yeah.
But we tried to put it together
as thoroughly as I could.
Yeah, and unbiased.
Yes.
All right. Well, is that it, Rosie?
That's it. That's all I got.
Thank you so much for putting this together. This was a really interesting story. Again, this is kind of like the stories we like to cover over on our Patreon for our premium episodes. More historically based stories with, some horrible things in them. But we're a little more laid back talking about things that happened a really long time ago.
Yeah. I guess I just was excited since it is Native American Heritage Month. So I felt like this could be a main feed episode too.
Yeah.
And I have a Patreon episode outline already set to go.
Yeah.
So I'm
we're
really
going to record that very soon.
Yes. And which is also historical, but creepy and weird. And
we'll probably announce it next week then.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening and watching if you're over on YouTube. Just another quick reminder, we are on YouTube, Voice of the Victim Podcast. If you want to watch us, we have video now. And every week we've been making slight improvements. So hopefully the video quality is better and the audio quality is better. We had a little oopsie-daisy with the mic last week. Rosie's mic started inching away from her and we didn't notice till we were done recording.
Right when we were done, I was like, oh.
It was like pointing away from her.
Yeah.
Probably heard that in the recording, so we're really sorry about that. But everything's a learning experience.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, guys. Bye.